The Cuban government today cleared the way for the first Havana-bound cruise out of Miami in more than half a century. That cruise has been in doubt lately because of Cuba's ban on any Cuban-born passengers from taking part. News Channel 8's Mark Douglas joining us now live from Port Tampa Bay with that report. Mark.
Well, good evening to you, Keith. Port Tampa executives are quite pleased by all of this because they hope to see one of these Havana-bound ships docked in that terminal back there in the not-too-distant future. Now, having said that, this is still a hot button for a lot of Cuban-born American people here in Florida. The prospect of sending Florida-based cruise ships to Havana has rankled Cuban Americans from Miami to Tampa. Protesters seized on Cuba's ban on Cuban-born travelers returning there by sea as a form of discrimination. But today, Carnival's CEO gleefully announced Cuba has dropped that policy.
We will be the first cruise line in over 50 years to sail from the U.S. to Cuba and back, and that's including with the opportunity to have on board those who were born in Cuba.
On Tuesday, activist Mario Quevedo delivered a letter to the Port of Tampa asking executives there to stop doing business with Carnival because it does business with Castro. Quevedo insists today's policy reversal by Cuba changes nothing. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
A bunch of gangsters do things at their convenience. They're neither good nor bad at their convenience, and that's what they did.
Travel agent Frank Reno organizes group visits to Cuba and sees the first Carnival cruise out of Miami as an icebreaker for the Port of Tampa.
Tampa seems like a natural in every way, shape, and form.
Reno tells us Havana's cruise port is primitive compared to other destinations and can't handle a sudden crush of cruise ships. But he believes it won't be long before Tampa jumps in the game.
And I think once the port starts ramping up here, I think people will prefer to come to Tampa as a jumping off point versus Miami.
Now, Port Tampa Bay's vice president, who is himself Cuban-born and an American now, tells me that this is really a natural stepping off place for people who want to go to Havana. He points out that it's only 18 hours away by cruise ship, a cruise ship he'd like to see docked back there sometime very soon.
I'm sure a lot of people would like to see that, Mark, but people can already travel from Tampa to Cuba by air. So talk a little bit about the significance of actually going there by a cruise ship.
Well, as you point out, we can already go there by airplane from Tampa, so this is largely symbolic. The first cruise ship leaves on May 1st. It will have 700 people. It's going to be a once every other week thing, so it really is largely symbolic, but it is a first dramatic step toward restoring that trade, that commerce by sea with Cuba, that something that hasn't happened since the days of John F. Kennedy more than half a century ago, Keith.
All right, thank you, Mark. I've been to that port in Cuba. It is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful landing spot, so we'll see how it all turns out. And a reminder, too, also coming up tomorrow, be sure to join me for a special news broadcast on the Cuban evolution. Historic changes are taking place in Cuba, and 8 is on your side with all the details. We'll have that for you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, a news special here on News Channel 8.